So, everybody, good evening. Welcome to the Trailblazer Hour, another session where we engage with each other, where we discuss, where we hear from a young, upcoming professional in our space of the environment, climate, and conservation, where we intentionally engage with important issues around conservation and the climate, around thought-provoking discussions. And we are so grateful to have you today. Thank you so much for coming in. I'm your host, Dr. Samantha Sitole, joining you from the lovely city of Bulawayo in Zimbabwe, in the south, in Matabeleland, if you know Zimbabwe. So in our previous session, we began by asking difficult questions with Deborah. If some of you were there, you will remember how engaging that discussion was. We asked, are carbon credits a fair deal? Or could they become another form of hidden exploitation? We heard powerful perspectives about community inclusion, about the importance of centering people and not just carbon metrics. We reflected on land rights, consent, power, and who benefits and who bears the burden. And in doing so, we realized something important. Carbon credits are not inherently good or bad, but they're like tools. And like any tool, their impact depends on how they are designed, implemented, monitored, and eventually governed. And that brings us to where we are today, because after questioning the ethics of carbon credits, after debating the theory and unpacking justice and community voices, the next logical question is, what does it actually look like then in practice? So how do these carbon projects move from policy documents to practice within our communities and within our lived realities and spaces, to households, to understanding emission reductions and monitoring actual work on the ground? Today, we move from this debate to delivery and to operational realities. So from should we ask, how is it actually being done? The session about grounding the conversation about conservation and climate justice and environmental justice around carbon credits, to critique the carbon finance theory, is now moving to how it actually functions and how we can champion it. And I think Ganizani is going to do such a great job doing this. So today we move to the mechanics, we explore the challenges, the systems, the data, and we're really looking forward to hearing what he has to say. So as we continue with the carbon credits series in this nature-based finance talk, we must keep asking, when financial flows into protecting a tree or an ecosystem, like we discussed in our previous sessions, how are the communities connected to the landscape included, or what does it look like? And how are we consulted, compensated, and empowered? And today we discuss this practically. So it is my honor to welcome our speaker here today, Ganizani Malango, with his talk titled Practical Carbon Projects, Examples from Africa. My apologies, from theory to impact, practical carbon projects from practical carbon project examples from Africa. And he brings critical and deeply grounded perspectives on carbon credits, and not just in theory. So Ganizani works where carbon finance meets community realities. As a carbon project specialist, he has spent the past 5 years implementing clean cooking, water purification, and e-cooking projects across Zambia and Malawi, ensuring that practical household solutions are structured into credible carbon projects. He oversees monitoring, verification, and quality control systems that transform daily actions into measurable emission reductions and verified credits. Driven by a passion for youth empowerment and African-led climate solutions, he is helping demonstrate how local community and climate action can generate sustainable funding and a lasting impact. So Ganizani, we are so excited and thrilled to have you here today. I'm sure a lot of people have questions after you talk, but I'm going to give you the floor now, please. And thank you for joining us and taking the floor now.
Right. Thank you so much, Samantha. That was a very comprehensive introduction. And thanks to everyone for joining this session. As Samantha has said, I am Ganizani Malango, and of course, I'm a Malawian. I am working with Upper Energy Group as a carbon operations manager, managing Zambia and Malawian markets. It is a huge honor for me to be here today on this platform organized by Share Screen. This is an opportunity to talk with my fellow conservations who are into the space, and also those admiring to be in this space. Um, it is indeed a great honor to share experience and also my knowledge in the sector. And my presentation is gonna focus much on the practicality of the carbon projects, from theory to impact, as I've titled it. And I'm gonna bring in indeed practical examples from Africa. So in this session, we are going to elaborate more on the implementation of carbon projects. And also we are going to look into the impact measurement and also verification. But we're also going to explore opportunities which are there in the sector. And lastly, we are going to look into the major risks and mitigation constellation in this space. So maybe let's look into carbon project. In the previous presentations, which my friend Albert Mulungi was also hosted here, he talked much about carbon projects. He gave a brief background of carbon projects, where he also discussed about the cycle and all you need to kickstart a carbon project. But for the purposes of those that missed that session, I'm going to just give a recap of what carbon projects are. So these are climate solutions that turn environmental actions into measurable impact. So in a community where we're doing different projects, different activities, now these are environmental action activities that are aimed at protecting the environment. But then in the carbon space, we are looking at measuring the impact of those projects to make sure that they're really impacting positively. But mostly in the carbon projects, we are looking at projects that are either reducing, avoiding, or removing the carbon emissions. And why are we really interested in these emissions? It's because these greenhouse gases, specifically carbon dioxide, these gases, when they are accumulated in the atmosphere, they cause what we're calling now global warming, causing climate change and all those impacts that we are coming across. So these projects that are aimed at reducing, avoiding, and removing carbon emissions are what are called the carbon projects. Okay. Now, when when the impact is measured, these projects generate what we call carbon credits. And I think this word is something that it's in the mouth of everyone nowadays talking about carbon projects. You cannot miss the word carbon credits. Now, one carbon credit is an equivalent of 1 metric ton of carbon dioxide reduced, avoided, or removed. And what makes these projects more unique is because of the impact is measured, verified, and converted into carbon credits. And these carbon credits are the ones that finance, they unlock access to finance, which then finance and sustain these projects. So if you look at all this, then it becomes now valid to say these climate action or environmental actions does not only work on environment or reducing the emissions, but they're also working on community development and sustainability of the projects that we are working on, thereby also improving livelihoods for the communities that these projects are being implemented. Now, I wanted us to look into the carbon cycle, like how does the projects come to being from the word go to a point where carbon credits have been issued. So as people who are in the conservation space, first step is for us to look at our projects and see, or whatever we're doing, is it really impacting on the environment? Is it really reducing, avoiding or removing emissions? And that's where now we're doing feasibility studies, feasibility assessment to understand how whatever we're doing is relevant in the carbon space. Then from there, when you understand all these things, then there are carbon standards which were established solely to manage operations and issuers of carbon credits. Now you also have to look into these standards and find methodologies. There are different methodologies that are designed to to help implement this kind of projects. So after that step, you are looking into project designing and financing. So at this stage, you're looking at is the methodology applicable to the project activity that we're doing, and also financing. On financing, you're looking at how do you pre-finance the project, and also you're looking at if at all you get to a stage where you're being issued carbon credits, are those credits making sense to sustain the project at the same time? When that answer has been fully outlined, then you go into the development of the project design document, and then in the carbon space, to make sure that the impacts are real, there is now independent bodies which are called the independent verification and validation bodies. These are established to make sure that they are able to monitor and verify the impact that the project developer is saying that they have impacted on. So before the project is implemented, the VVBs have to validate the project to make sure that everything else is in place. Then there comes a stage where you have to register the project with a standard. So, for example, if you are implementing a project which is using a methodology for gold standard, then you are registering the project under gold standard under that methodology. And when it's fully registered, that's where you go to implementation and monitoring. So implementation, for example, if you're implementing, let's say, a cookstove project, implementation means you're now starting to distribute the stoves according to the methodology that you're using. And modeling now comes in to measure and quantify the impact which is there on the ground. When that is measured and quantified, the report is submitted to the VVBs to verify. And after verification, the report is submitted to the standard again for issuance of carbon credits. So this can go back to monitoring again, because if a project is like 7 years, then it means if you're doing monitoring each year, you're able to quantify the impact on that particular year. In the following year, you go again and do the monitoring, then verification, then issuers. The last step now is determinant of verified emissions reduction. In this case, we're also talking of the carbon credits. So you have been issued, then the retirement of these credits now is what we're calling either selling or offsetting. But then the question might be, after we have been issued with these carbon credits, is there a way, is there demand indeed? Because it's one thing to generate carbon credits, and also it's one thing to retire those credits or sell those credits. So the demand is there, the supply, we're looking at mechanisms that issue the carbon credits. So there are a number of them: the government crediting mechanism, independent crediting mechanism, and international crediting mechanism. On the demand side, these credits can be used for domestic compliance, international compliance, and also nationally determined contributions achievement for different countries. These are commitments that countries make to achieve in terms of reducing or offsetting their emissions. Then the last one is voluntary commitments, whereby either companies or individuals can just commit to say, okay, I want to reduce or offset this much. My next slide is just explaining further about the demand and supply thing, as discussed internationally, creating mechanisms, etc., etc. Let's look at project types. So in the carbon space, there are two main types of projects that can be implemented. The first one, nature-based. These are projects that are avoiding or removing emissions in the atmosphere in the, like naturally. So this capture or avoid emissions through ecosystems. For example, if you have a forestry project, obviously those trees are capturing emissions from the atmosphere. It can be deforestation, also soil carbon. There's so many projects under the nature-based. Biochar is also one of them. On the tech-based projects, these are projects that are using technologies to either um, uh, avoid or reduce emissions. For example, I mentioned earlier on about improved cookstove projects. So that is a technology that has been developed to replace maybe a traditional cookstove, which uses a lot of charcoal, or maybe the three-stone firewood, which uses a lot of fire. Um, so if you develop a technology that is reducing fuel need or fuel use, then obviously it's gonna also impact on reduction in the emissions that are emitted. So nature-based and tech-based, the only difference is the other one is using different technologies that are developed specifically to avoid or reduce emissions, while the nature-based projects are avoiding and also removing using ecosystems. Uh, but then, if we're talking of the impact of a project, then we are talking of there was maybe a baseline scenario, obviously, a baseline scenario which was there, business as usual. Then we have introduced another scenario which is now impacting on the baseline scenario. In this case, in the carbon projects, I wanted us to look into a few baseline scenarios where the impact has been shown and proven. So, for example, the cookstove project, the baseline scenario is that maybe communities or households are using inefficient cookstove or open fires that are using a lot of fuel, either firewood or charcoal, but use of those fuels is contributing to emissions. Now, introducing a technology that uses less fuel is now a project scenario which is reducing the fuel need in that particular household. For example, as you can see on my left there, the baseline scenario before project activity, there is traditional methods of cooking and treating water. And these, as you can see, there are chances that they're going to use a lot of fuel, firewood or charcoal, and then they're going to emit a lot of emissions. Also, definitely they the smoke which is going to be produced there is also going to affect the individuals that are involved in the cooking in that particular household. Also affecting indoor air pollution, contributing more. So introducing a clean cook stove now is only trying to reduce the fuel, and also these particular cook stoves are supposed to, in terms of cooking time, they're a bit faster than the other stoves, reducing smoke and also reducing time. In terms of safe water, we're looking at let's say in a community or in a school, like per our project, maybe a school doesn't have access to clean and safe water, or a community doesn't have access to clean and safe water. Chances are that that community, they can boil that water to make it safe and clean. And if they use, unsustainable fuel sources to boil that water, like firewood or charcoal, they're going to emit emissions. They're going to emit gases and use fuel, definitely. So providing safe water to those communities or those institutions is now eliminating the chance of that institution to boil water to make it safe and clean. So that reduction now, or that elimination of fuel use and also emissions, are the ones that is now qualifying the project to be part of a carbon project. And the results and benefits, obviously, we have reduced emissions, we have reduced fuel use, then definitely we're going to have carbon credits, which we can now turn into finance for our project. But aside that, carbon projects are also designed to contribute to sustainable development goals. As we're saying, definitely the project scenario has reduced the money that the household is spending on buying fuel. The time has been reduced, they're able to cook faster, they have enough time to participate in other economic activities. These projects are also contributing to the sustainable development goals by reducing fuel need. It means the household is saving on money to buy fuel. And also on time, they're cooking faster than before. On health, because there is a reduction on smoke, which is being produced by cooking in the household. So these projects does not only work on reducing the carbon emissions, but they're also contributing highly on the sustainable development goals. And as you're designing a project, it is required to also identify the sustainable development goals that the project is gonna impact on. So yeah, my next slide is just showing a bit of the baseline and project scenario. If you see the picture on the left, you see that the household is using an inefficient fuel, which is producing more smoke. The middle one as well, there is a three-stone fire, which is also producing more smoke. But the last picture there, you can see that's an electric pressure cooker, which is more cleaner than the other two, and it's completely it has completely eliminated the emissions that the household is emitting. It's more safer. That's why you can see maybe they're able to cook from inside the house. You cannot use three-stone fire in the house. Now, let's look at practical examples of carbon projects. I just took 3 examples for this session, but there are a lot of carbon project examples which can be discussed at a later point. The first example is agroforestry project, which is integrating trees into farmland to capture and store carbon. Sustainable practices improve soil health, definitely crop yields, and also reduce carbon emissions, thereby generating carbon credits that benefits the community and also the environment at large. In the middle there is improved cookstove, still using smart home stove as a reference point because that's a project that I'm also working on. So these stoves are more efficient and reduce fuel usage. The carbon and smoke emissions have also automatically been reduced. This also reduces cooking fuel expenditures and time for cooking, then obviously impacting on social and economical benefits by saving time and fuel purchases. The last one is institutional safe water. This is dispersing the need to boil water to make it safe and clean for drinking, thereby enhancing good health for the users and also reducing institutional carbon footprint. Obviously, it's also reducing on the resources that the institution or the household can spend to make the water safe and clean. In the Safe Water project, it is required to do a baseline study. I mean, in all the projects, but the baseline study in the Safe Water project requires a project developer to do water quality test to identify if indeed the institutions have unsafe and unclean water for drinking. And then when you introduce the water quality test, continues to make sure that at every point of project implementation, the institution or the households are able to access safe and clean water for all those benefits. Now, let's look at key principles of carbon projects. So these projects are supposed to show additionality, what we call additionality. So the whole point there is that a carbon project developer needs to prove that this project wouldn't have happened or cannot be sustainable without carbon finance. So if you're implementing a project, you need to prove, you say, we need carbon finance to sustain this project. Without carbon finance, this project it's quite impossible to implement this project and everything else. So also the projects are supposed to be measurable, the impact, rather they're supposed to be measurable and verifiable. As I said earlier on, that there is a lot of monitoring, verification that happens within the course of implementing the project. The whole purpose is to make sure that no one is sitting there cooking figures and um, craving for the credits that maybe the impact is not there on the ground. You can agree with me that somebody can sit here and say, I have been implementing this project and this is the impact, but through measurement and verification, you are able to determine whether the impact is real on the ground. Also, these projects are supposed to be permanent in the sense that if you're implementing a project, the emissions that you have reduced or the contribution to the sustainable development goals are supposed to be there. Not today you're implementing a project and you have reduced emissions, and tomorrow, after you have been issued with carbon credits, those emissions are emitted back into the atmosphere. Those are supposed to be permanently avoided, reduced, or removed from the atmosphere. Lastly, these projects are unique in the sense that every offset must represent 1 ton of carbon dioxide through robust monitoring and verification systems. We try to avoid or prevent double counting. So double counting in this sense is that maybe one stove that has been distributed is being accounted for maybe 2 households or 3 households, while there is just one stove. It's only one household which is using that stove. So it can be either way. It can be 2 stoves in one household, whereby the impact is the same to is the same as one stove, and then you're cramming for all those 2 stoves in that particular household. So everything that we have discussed before leads to monitoring, reporting, and verification. You can agree with me that in this kind of projects, the key thing is MRV. So this is more important because it safeguards the transparency, accuracy, and environmental integrity of the project. Without MRV, then we can be lying to ourselves that the impact is there while there is zero impact on the ground. So this helps show the project results and also the real difference on the ground. Without this, the carbon project cannot generate carbon credits, because how do you prove that there is a real impact on the ground if you haven't monitored and verified the project? So MRV ensures that greenhouse gas emissions reductions are real, and it involves correcting project data. Mostly, the methodology would highlight on how monitoring activities are supposed to be happening, and there are different ways according to different methodologies. But mostly, like for example, the cookstove project, every year you are supposed to conduct the usage surveys and also the kitchen performance test. The usage surveys only highlight the cooking patterns, and then the kitchen performance test is now quantifying the fuel use and also the real reduction in terms of emissions. So this really helps a lot. To make sure that these impacts are real. And then after that, that there is independent verification to maintain transparency and integrity. But aside these MRVs, there is now an introduction of digital tools which are used to verify and track usage and emissions reductions in real time. So GMRV are more like the digital tools used. For example, there is IoT devices and also SAMS devices which are used to monitor. These are installed on devices. It can be different devices according to the project. For the cookstove project, you can install a SAMS device on the stove, which is going to measure usage pattern of the stove. Lastly, the benefits, it ensures credible and measurable emissions reductions, build trust, transparency, prevents double counting, supports accurate marketing reporting, and also strengthens integrity, provides data to improve and scale the impact. Okay, so let's finish with the challenges and logistics for the project. It sounds super interesting for the project. Everyone would want to jump into this kind of project, but what are the major setbacks? So, one, there is local knowledge and capacity lacking in the spaces that we are in. You can agree with me that maybe this topic, especially here in Africa, this is now that we're talking more about it after the introduction of the African Carbon Market Framework, and each individual countries are trying to adopt and I think streamline their own framework for that particular country. This is when now more people are talking about the topic and more people are opening up. There are more capacity building sessions. This is one of it, whereby people are now becoming more aware of this project. But it has been a challenge all along when it comes to limitation on knowledge and capacity of in-country people that can be able to take up these projects. Another aspect is access to initial financing. As you may see in the presentation, this whole process requires money before you get to the issuance of carbon credits and also even selling the carbon credits. So there is higher upfront cost. This is for the feasibility studies, the basement studies, registration, operations, monitoring itself, engaging the third party to do the verification. All this requires huge funding for you to kickstart. Otherwise, without this kind of hard funding mechanisms that can be available in the systems, then I think it's quite impossible for one to implement a project. But all in all, these are doable projects. They're very impactful, and the finance provides really a huge step to sustain our projects in the communities. Otherwise, that's all I had for now. I will leave it here and push it to Samantha for questions and comments. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Ganizani. That was so insightful. Your talk covered a lot of, I think, questions a lot of people had, especially in terms of what carbon credits are, how they work, and how they can be practically implemented on a everyday level. And I think you answered these questions very well. And you touched on a lot of things in terms of nature-based solutions, tech solutions. You touched on, funding. You touched on challenges. And I don't want to take too much time right now trying to summarize what you said, but I just wanted to highlight those key points in terms of like the community. These efficient methods are being used to help the community to remove gas emissions within their own kitchens. I think that's something that stood out for me. And um, one something that I got, like a quote from what you said, was that permanence is the foundation of credibility in carbon markets. That the solutions must have permanence in what they're doing. Otherwise, what are we actually doing, especially towards the SDGs? And I think that's something important when we look at these projects that you've highlighted and you've given us today. I have one from Seletu in the chat. Omo, I see your hand, and I'll get to you soon. She says, good evening, Mr. Malango. What methodologies do you recommend for ensuring emission reductions are measurable, verifiable, and permanent in a specific project context?
There are different methodologies under different registries. For example, the gold standard has their own methodologies, different methodologies. Vela has own methodologies. But what is more important is, let's say I am a project developer. What I need to look in is, what am I really doing, like on the feasibility study? If I'm into nature-based solutions, like maybe I have an agroforestry project, then I'll look into a methodology which is matching my own project. And then from there, you can be able to determine which methodology to go by. But the most important thing as well is to ensure that there is a clear baseline conservative assumptions and leakage assessment. And also, it should be something that you are going to be comfortable and manage in terms of the MRVs, monitoring, reporting, and also verification. But otherwise, uh, I cannot really point out to say this is the best methodology because it depends on the kind of projects that you are involved in already or on the kind of projects that you are interested to be involved in.
Thank you for that. I think it's important as well, like to be context specific, especially when it comes to methodologies. I think one question that popped up as you were speaking, especially with the picture, and I hope I'm not asking someone else's question, but in terms of, I saw that the clean cooking stoves, they use electricity. Is that a challenge for most people, especially in the rural context, to get access to electricity to be able to use those stoves?
You mean for the electric stoves?
Yes.
It depends now. So you're looking at also your beneficiaries or the people that you're going to distribute the stuff to. So every methodology will guide you in terms of who are the beneficiaries in this kind of project. Like the electric cooking project, obviously you cannot be distributing EPCs to a little setup where the baseline scenario is they're using firewood. Definitely, they're not going to utilize the EPCs in that kind of aspect. So the most important thing is to look at what is your baseline scenario and what is it if it's nature based, what is it that you're coming in, or if it's a technology based, what is the technology that you're bringing in, and is there really going to be a real impact on the ground?
The first one is from John Chirwa, who says, how long does it take to start getting insurances or maybe insurances? I think he's trying to say.
Okay, thank you so much. It's a unique opportunity for me to be in this meeting. It is an eye-opener, and I am Momo Iswaiko, Coordinator, Peace Point Development Foundation. We are working on environmental justice, peace building, and human rights in the Niger Delta region of Nigeria. I'm glad to hear the presentation about carbon credits. I know a state, I hope I'm communicating.
Yeah, sure.
Yes, the state that I based, which is Cross River State, was a pilot state in Nigeria that adopted carbon credits since 2011. I'm talking about the red plus activities in Nigeria. Cross River State was the pilot state since 2011. In that process, a lot of land grabs were observed. People were displaced forcefully. Government seized over a lot of land, and even reserve areas which were owned by community, the most in Africa, Equity Initiative, the most outstanding community conservation forest was threatened by rape. And I want to also let you know that when it comes to clean cooking stove, as an organization, we have trained communities to use local materials to produce this, which they tested to be effective. But my big question and challenge is over the years, I want to tell you that Cross River State has over 50% of Nigeria's remaining rainforests, covering over 640,000 acres. That is how it is. But however, this program came, destroyed the people's economic livelihood, and also displaced a lot of people forcefully. Today, those people cannot have access to their lands again. And I want to ask, can you mention one country that rape has ever succeeded? Because we have, based on our experience, We have sampled more communities. It's all about promises, 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 empty promises. None has succeeded. Please, can you enlighten us? Because my communities are grieved. They don't want to have this again. They want to also go to a country that you said that you will mention as a successful country to also see how it is successful. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that question, Umo. Danizani, just to remind you of the previous question from John in the chat, how long does it take to start getting insurance? I think that's what he was trying to say. And then Umo's question about the RED project. Please go ahead.
Beautiful. Beautiful. So, in terms of how long does it take to get the issuance of carbon credits, it varies according to projects and also how fast you're moving as a project, as a project developer. So you find that maybe the feasibility study on its own can take you maybe 2 months. Different from other projects, maybe it can take you a month or so. And then the validation and registration process will also take its own time. But when you start implementing the project, also monitoring takes some time. So that also depends on how you're implementing the project and also the methodology that you're using. But mostly you will give it like 12 months to 24 months before you get your first issuance of these carbon credits. This is also so because even if as a project you have measured the impact and you have this is the reduction that we have impacted on this particular project, there comes another stage of verification by the independent body. Then if they have questions, it's a back and forth thing until everything else has been satisfied in terms of the data and also the impact which is there on the ground. So give and take 12 to 24 months to get your first issuance. Now, selling is also another thing, depending also. If you have a buyer ready for your credits, then it becomes even much easier. On the situation in Niger, is it ASU? Thank you so much for that. So the carbon market, it is guided by different legislators and different carbon standards, which are helping in terms of making sure that the impact is real. So there is issues to do with leakage and everything else, but these initiatives are really helping issues experienced in some projects. So issues to do with benefit sharing and also benefits of the carbon market. Frameworks now in that particular country are now there to ensure inclusivity. So right now, as I already mentioned earlier on, after the introduction of the Africa Carbon Market Framework, each and every country is now adopting their own, adopting and streamlining with their own carbon market framework. So each country has their own guidelines that guides the implementation of different projects. So let's say like for Malawi, we have a carbon market framework launched last year, which is providing a guide, and also that there is an aspect of share of proceeds, whereby all the income that has been generated by the carbon project or the carbon developer has to come back to the country as well as part of sharing the proceeds, whereby now those proceeds are going back to the communities. But then in terms of the unfortunate situation that happened in Niger, I think is to do with now feasibility studies and everything else, and also the kind of methodology. I am not fully aware of the kind of project which was implemented there, so I cannot comment so much on that topic. But what I can tell you is these projects are not just projects that you can just wake up and say you're implementing the project. There are a lot of processes that needs to be followed, a lot of guidelines and a lot of safeguarding principles that needs to be followed to make sure that the communities are protected, the ecosystems are protected, and by the end of the day, the income that comes in the form of carbon finance is also going back to these communities and also contributing to the sustainable development goals.
Thank you so much, for really answering and elaborating your answers to these questions. I think I just had a follow-up question from Umo. In terms of, are there any safeguarding measures to protect communities in the case of Umo's in the Niger Delta, where the communities are being forcibly removed from land for red projects, especially around carbon credits? Are there any safeguarding methods or tools that are there to protect the communities in terms of justice, anything like that you can speak on?
Yeah. So every country and every framework has also the environmental protection policies in place in the countries, which is now the key focal point when it comes to also the carbon projects, that they're supposed to align with the environmental protection and also protecting the communities at large. So we can also look at like the leakages in this kind of sector, where you're talking of you can be reducing emissions in one aspect, while also those emissions have increased somewhere else, maybe because you displaced, yes, this aspect, but then let's say, for example, you have maybe displaced people from one location because you want to plant trees for to reduce emissions, and then these communities have gone somewhere else where now the activities have even increased, and now they're emitting more emissions. So each and every country has environmental protection policies which are set in place to make sure that the communities and also the ecosystems are protected. So
Okay.
for a carbon project, the methodologies also require leakage assessment and also mitigation to ensure real net reductions are there, not like you are reducing here and then there is another increase on the other end. Yeah.
From Bonisi, he said, they're saying, comparing nature-based and tech-based carbon project types, which ones are more easily adoptable for the marginalized African communities? So comparing nature-based versus tech-based, which are more adoptable for marginalized African communities?
I think they're both adaptable. The most important thing is we need to look into which communities we're working in, because if you look at the nature-based solutions, let's say, for example, the agroforestry project in a country where maybe agriculture is something that they believe in so much, then it's much easier to implement an agroforestry project whereby everything else is working for the good of that community. And also, when you look into the tech-based solutions as well, let's say, for example, in a society or in a city where people are using more charcoal, then introducing, let's say, the electric cooking devices will be more favorable and also more adaptable. So it just depends. I cannot really say that nature-based are more aligned than maybe tech-based, but it just depends with because we're saying the primary thing to do is to determine the problem which is there, the baseline scenario which is there, and then you're moving into developing the project. It's not just about developing the project without understanding the baseline scenario on the other hand.
And I like that you keep emphasizing the importance of the baseline scenario. And I think we need to keep that in mind when we're discussing these projects, the baseline scenario. Thank you so much. We have a following question from Dennis Chirambo. Yes, two actually. And I think you touched on this one a little bit. How are local communities benefiting beyond carbon revenue? And secondly, what are the biggest credibility risks currently facing the carbon market today? I think you touched on a bit on number one, but please go ahead.
Okay. So, for example, let's say you're implementing an agroforestry project in a certain community. It's not just implementing the project. You also come with different incentives to incentivize the communities to participate in the project, because the key thing as well is participation. The communities needs to participate. In terms of maybe the tech-based projects, you're also looking at maybe providing some incentives, but at the same time, most of the project developers, what they do is they reduce or subsidize the cost of purchasing, or some even distribute for free. So one, these households are accessing these technologies freely, which is now turning into their own benefit, like the health benefits and also the financial economic benefit, whereby they have reduced the monies that they need to spend on buying fuel. What are the biggest credibility risks? We're looking at, even though there are strict guidelines and principles set in place, but still more you find maybe other project developers may be diverting from all these things. But also the monitoring part is essential in this kind of projects, because you can just assume that because you have distributed 1,000 stoves and all those people who you have distributed to are using the stoves, which is sometimes not the case. So monitoring and verifications are the key aspect of the projects, because they ensure that the impact is indeed there, and the communities are really benefiting. The environment is, the impact is real and credible on the ground.
Mm. And I think that also speaks to the sustainability and the permanence of the project, which I think comes to Sylvia's question about carbon. She says carbon credit projects come with a lot of paperwork that requires communities to sign for consent. This makes some communities get skeptical, especially when it comes to issues of declaring land details. They feel it's a form of land grabbing. How best could this be handled with ease?
So yes, indeed, carbon credits comes with a lot of paperwork. It's not a lot though, if you look at it, because you're looking at you're implementing a project. I'll give an example of the cookstove project. Okay, so if you're implementing a cookstove project, then the aim of a carbon project is, by the end of the day, you're getting issuance of carbon credits, and then those carbon credits, it's a project developer who is getting the issuance of carbon credits, but who did the actual reduction is the household. Okay, so the household needs now to consent to say they're giving over the rights of the reduction or the impact of that particular technology, and now the carbon developer they can get the issues of carbon credits and then use that to co-finance the project for sustainability purposes. So all those paperwork that are there in the carbon space is to make sure that we are moving according to the guidelines and also the core principles of the carbon project. So yeah, it might seem tiresome, but this is just to make sure that the projects are safeguarded.
And I think a lot of the questions, at least the way I'm seeing them, is they come with a lot of justice issues in the crux of the question, especially the next question from Umo. And I have to ask, in terms of, I understand the processes and the paperwork that's involved, trying to involve the community, especially for sustainability, especially if it's nature-based or tech, with all of that happening. But at what point, I think, for me, is it the community, I think the ones at the decision-making seat, because it seems like the project developers are the ones who are sort of making the decisions for the project in terms of carbon, in terms of how the community would, in terms of these projects, of course, would shift or transition into more sustainable solutions, if you understand what I mean. Are the communities, I think, in the decision-making seat, are they part of the negotiations when it comes to coming up with such solutions? I mean, in terms of the clean ovens, for example, I guess it's more hands-on, because these are tools that they use on a daily basis. But in terms of, for instance, what Umo is asking about, he asks which country has ever benefited from carbon credits. And speaking about communities in terms of the preparatory phases, I'm thinking also in terms of FPIC, the free prior informed consent as well, in understanding like the full breadth of the impact of such projects on the community, especially when it comes to finances. And you spoke about land grabbing in terms of what are they actually benefiting versus what they're losing, for these projects. I hope that's not a long-winded question, but these are sort of the thoughts that are coming into my head as you've been speaking.
No, first of all, we should all understand that carbon projects are not projects that they implementers are just implementing without an oversight, you know. So these projects have guidelines for you to get to legislation. I can agree that maybe there are some times that you cannot avoid, that maybe there are sometimes some projects that have maybe diverted, or maybe the impact was not shown on the ground or whatever. But the thing is now even we are more streamlined in terms of at national levels, because uh, each country is now more involved in participation of these projects. So no carbon developer, they can come to Malawi and start implementing a project in Malawi without going through the necessary steps in that host country. So in each country, what there are people that are responsible for making sure that this project are credible and the impact is there on the ground. So these are the most important steps that each project developer has to take to make sure that everything else is also. But at the same time, if you talk of the communities, you know, maybe a carbon developer is not, let's say, a project implemented in Malawi. Maybe the company implementing the project is not a Malawian company, you know. Yes, sometimes maybe the communities can be exploited, but to safeguard, then that's why now the government is now coming in to make sure that they are also. Actually, right now, more countries are coming in to have their own registry at country level to make sure that all the projects are registered and they're followed. So even monitoring, it's not just about the carbon developer doing the monitoring and also the verification. The government is going to be involved more when it comes to monitoring these things to make sure that they're credible as well. Even when it comes to demand, now the projects are, because I think Helbert talked about the voluntary market and the compliance market. The compliance market is where the government regulates more on the projects, while the voluntary, key players are just there trying. But now, even in this space, most countries have seen they're coming to regulate both markets, whether compliance or voluntary. They're trying to regulate both markets to make sure that the impact is there on the ground and the communities are fully protected at the same time.
Okay, great. Okay. And that makes sense because it has to start from the state level in order to protect, I guess, the
Yeah.
community at the community level and the individual and the household level. Um, so I'm going to ask the last question in the chat, which is from Ishmael, who says, how do you prevent greenwashing and prove it's measurable?
Okay. So, one, we need to use approved carbon methodologies under recognized standards, and also identifying or establishing a clear baseline scenario. After that, you know for sure the methodology is right, the business scenario is right, then the next thing is to make sure, to make sure that there is robust monitoring and verification, then going into the verification by third party, and also transparency when it comes to reporting and also registry tracking. That's how you can protect greenwashing.
Mm. And I think you also touched on it when you spoke about the MVPs and the DNVP. MVP or NVI, I'm sorry, in your presentation. But just before we finish off and before I let you go, Ganizani, do you have any final words or any points of action or call to action that you'd wanna give the participants before we close?
I will say from two perspectives. The first perspective is if you are a project developer or you are an inspiring project developer. And my second perspective will be on the part of if you are part of a community. So if you are an inspiring carbon developer or you are a carbon developer yourself, then you need to understand your host country policies and guidelines on carbon projects, and also it is important to streamline with the communities that will be working in, to make sure that the impact that we are really claiming is real and credible at the same time, because we're looking at not just framing for the emissions reduction, but also looking at community development and sustainability of the project, So if you're a carbon developer, you need to make sure that you understand the methodology that you are working on or you are registering the project on, because that will help you streamline with necessary steps and guidelines to make sure that the project is a success by the end of the day. If you are a community, let's say I am a participant, then or I'm part of the community which is participating in a carbon project, it is only right for us as communities or project participants to, ask more questions and also seek for clarifications where we don't understand, because all the carbon projects that have been implemented in our communities, they need to be transparent enough, So as a community member, I have a right to stand up and question the carbon developer on how the project is being implemented and how it's also protecting the communities, the environment at large, and everything else. We don't just participate because we want to participate or just sign. I've seen a lot of things whereby communities or participants just sign the papers without even reading and understanding what they're signing for, and then you call them for different activities which were already outlined on where they're signing, and then they don't understand, and they're denying. So we need to be on the same page. Whether you're a participant or a carbon developer, you need to make sure that you're on the same page. But lastly, I would like to say this is a sector that is really growing, and as the people who are in the conservation sector, we can really take advantage of the finance carbon finance, to make sure that our projects are financed and they are sustainable. It is more important. So the federations and also, information is out there everywhere. We can reach out to people or LinkedIn to just further understand, because we might be lacking finance for our project while finance is sitting right there. We're waiting for people to just tap from it. Let me stop there. Thank you so much, Samantha.
Thank you so much, Ganizani. Thank you so much. Just say thank you so much for taking your time to educate us, to tell us about your projects. But not only that, your talk was very technical and very insightful, bringing us into your world and also making us understand the processes of carbon credits, especially within the projects, the baseline scenarios, the MRVs, and most importantly, some of the challenges that, grassroots level communities face in actually financing and making these projects sustainable. And I think one of your calls to action that's most important is continuously being eager to learn and to understand beyond this talk. Because once we leave here, we might forget 80% of what Ganizani has said, but it's an important topic for us, especially as young people and older people alike, to understand what's happening within our carbon markets, especially on the African continent, because we host a lot of the land that's being used for carbon credits, carbon sinks, etc. So it's important for us to educate ourselves, like coming to talks like this one, also going on YouTube, looking for more talks or lectures, just to understand what it is that our communities are dealing with, especially when we are hands-on with our fellow communities. I think it's important, as you said, educate yourself, understand what it is that we're actually signing, what it is that we're actually getting ourselves into. So, Ganizani, thank you so much.